I'm your board chair, Steve Fancher. I'm going to call to order the October 20th edition of the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District Board meeting. Wendy, can we do roll call?
Yes. And if Colin could call Jim Canoff, that would be great. Nancy Hendrickson. No Nancy. Steve Fancher.
Here.
Eric Mueller.
Here.
Oh, awesome. You can hear us.
You can hear me?
We can hear you and you can hear us.
Good. Thank you for your staff taking care of me. Thank you.
Sorry for any confusion about the location, Eric. Thanks for being with us today. Appreciate it.
Special kudos to Tracy. Thank you, Tracy.
Yay, Tracy.
Dave Ritma. John Yama.
Here.
Shirley Craddock. See you, Shirley.
Can you hear us, Shirley?
I'm marking Shirley as present. Lori Stegman.
Here.
Ken Anderton.
Here.
Corky Collier.
Here.
James Allison.
Here.
Mary Helen Kincaid.
Here.
Tanny Stephenson.
Here.
Eric Molander.
Here.
Danelle Bell. Ed Washington.
Here.
Bob Salinger.
Here.
Heather King.
Here.
And did we get Dave Ritma? Nancy? We have 15 board members present.
Dave is here, but for some reason we can't hear you, Dave.
Oh, I see him.
It looks like he can hear us.
Yeah. Dave, we can't hear you.
You know, I'm just thinking if we muted all the board members, these meetings would go faster, but
Would you get it?
You know, if we muted the executive director, I bet we could go faster too. I'm just saying.
that's absolutely true, Corky. I have to own that one.
I think the board chair is going to have to get this meeting under control. Are we ready for Wendy? Is the roll call finished?
Yes, it is. We have 16 board members present.
Excellent.
And Nancy has arrived, Wendy.
Oh, thank you.
I'm here.
Hi, Nancy. Our first order of business is to approve the minutes from the September meetings, and those are found on pages 2 through 11 of your board packet. Hope you had a chance to take a look, and I'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
I will move to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Nancy Hendrickson, a second by Corky Collier to approve the minutes. We're going to do everybody at once for this one. So all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Do we have any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you for that. Before I introduce the first topic, I want to kind of set the stage, say a few things. I think this is something I attempted to say at the last meeting, probably ineffectively. I think it can be helpful just as a reminder, kind of this interim board. Our primary mission is to develop the funding plan for the permanent district, for the permanent board to take over and then formulate the detailed programs and move the business of the district forward. But I think it can be confusing, and it's a good reminder for all of us as we're digesting information about any of the aspects that we have been over the course of many, many weeks and in some cases months, whether we're talking about cultural history or DEI or emergency response or water quality or even flood safety. When we're talking about these programs, we're trying to get a sense of what potential costs may be so that we can start to develop this revenue plan. Again, everything points to that. And if we start getting sidetracked, the more we get sidetracked into trying to actually solve or determine where some of these specific programs are going, knowing that the permanent board is going to do that. The permanent board, even if we set specific programs in some cases, they're going to be the board that really has to enact that, and then they're likely going to change maybe what we set. We really are here to figure out the revenue question. And today is all about that. Again, it's been many months, years in coming, and here we are. We're going to start talking about some of the really difficult things to talk about. This is really the meat of the matter that's going to move this district forward. I did get some concerns from folks that this is a lot of information that we got prior to this meeting. That's true, but I want to assure folks that this is the start of a conversation. This is really information and staff being here to go through it and to answer some of your questions, to enable you to really start processing it so that we can have a series of meetings to really get through some of the decisions we need to get through. So just be patient. It's a lot of information, yes, but we will get through it and answer questions. I also want to say that we want to hold questions on this next presentation until the end of this presentation. And you're going to be very tempted, I think, at points to want to get into some of the specifics around some of the numbers, the budget numbers, but we're going to get into that in the second half of this meeting. So let's let Ben Rowe's going to go through the support services presentation. Let's let him get through that information. Let's hold our questions. And then when you're very tempted to want to debate whether we should be spending more money on this or less money on that, let's wait. Let's let in the later half of the presentation here, we're going to have, or the program, we're going to have Lori Baker go through the 5-year financial forecast. And that's really where the details are going to be. And that's where we can start to, as a board, weigh in on some of these things that we've asked to weigh in on. I'll also mention that Sarah O'Brien is here. She's going to be stepping in to facilitate some of these discussions. It's going to enable me to participate more in my participant role for the city of Gresham, but also just to help us to keep things moving through the presentations. We've got a lot of meaty material to cover today, so it's going to be very helpful for her to step up and help me there. With that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Ben. And Ben, are you ready to go?
I am. Thank you.
Okay.
And thank you for that intro. I do appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Ben Rowe, the budget manager for the district. And can you see my screen okay? Thank you. Today is our 4th installment of our discussion of programs at the district. A survey, a review of currently what our programs provide, our scope of work, and some of our current and future needs. So today we're going to go through a process reminder. We're going to talk about our purpose, why we're talking about specifically support services. We're going to differentiate between core and support services, talk about our known service gaps currently and our new needs in the future. So just a process reminder that we are in this funnel area right here. We're talking about program concepts, and today I'm just talking about support services, and I'll talk about what support services are in 1 minute. And so what we have done, the discussions that we've completed over the last several months, we've had multiple conversations about equity and framework. We've had conversations about flood safety and environment, emergency management, and cultural history. Today, hopefully this is the 4th and final installment of this program conversation discussion. And then we're going to move on and talk about our revenue tools and cost estimates. So when we talk about support services and systems, I wanted to bring this as a reminder to the board that one of the aspects of ORS 550 is to create the district and provide this board with the legislative authority to create the financial capacity to carry out the purposes set forth in ORS 550. So the board may not consider a dissolution until and unless this board, this entity, the urban district, has sufficient capital and operating funding mechanism to fund all of our operations and our capital. And so today, what we're going to talk about is support services and what our current service gaps are and some of the needs that we have to fund our operations. I'm going to talk about how our operations, the support services, support our core mission. So when we talk about support services, we really have a dual role. So we support, when we say support services, we're talking finance, the leadership, the executive director's office, HR, IT, those types of programs really support all of the things, our core mission, our operations, and we support one another. So finance supports legal and legal supports finance, and we work together to deliver the core mission. So that's one role. Another role that support services really provides is a compliance role. And support services in any organization, especially in government agencies, has this dual role that we support the core mission operations, but also we support the compliance and the regulatory affairs of the organization and all of the operations throughout all operations across the agency. So that includes the federal, state, and local laws, and also the financial regulatory compliance needs, especially related to grant requirements. And also we do our best to perform our admin functions to support our core mission. So I just wanted to highlight that dual role. So when we talk about support services, it's really about the financial capability to fund both our core mission functions and the support services that support our core mission. So one of the goals, as you remember, of this transition to the new urban district is to create more efficiency, specifically with support services and delivering that core mission. So our current revenue structure constrains the resources that are available to ensure that those regulatory compliance deliverables can happen and are efficiently facilitated. Also, regarding our compliance with federal funding partner administration controls, and also the ability to implement our cybersecurity measures and customer information protection. And those are all functions of support services. So core services we're defining as engineering, operations, and planning. And support services, we're defining as information technology, legal, finance, communications, and also the executive director's office and human resources. I'm going to focus my comments today on just these 4 highlighted support service programs: IT, legal, finance, and communications. So when we talk about IT, the board may or may not be aware, but our current information technology program is a contracted service. We engage a contractor to provide some support services, desktop support, security, network, office application software. All of that is currently outsourced to a contractor. There are very small portions of a couple of positions at the district that do some physical support, like hand out hardware to new employees and help troubleshoot those things, and also run our geographic information system. But again, those are very minor portions of 2 positions that serve on campus. The rest, as I mentioned, is contracted out. When we talk about our current revenue structure and the constraints that it places on this program, we, the district does not have a IT strategic plan. So we would look to fund that strategic plan with a new funding source. Also, that includes cybersecurity and client information protection. Also, our current, the little IT infrastructure that physical infrastructure that we do have in the district resides in the floodplain. And so in the future with a new revenue structure, we would look to fund removing that infrastructure out of the floodplain and completing an IT strategic plan, and also implementing records management, all those things that I mentioned. So when we look at legal provides the board legal counsel as well as general counsel to all the district's administration. So we have 6 legal entities here in the district, and the 2 people who are currently in legal provide that counsel to all 6 of those entities and employees across the agency. That includes all intergovernmental agreements, all procurement contracts, policy review, real estate, legal risk, compliance and enforcement, district legislation, all of those support programs. Under the new district, once we transition to the urban district, this amount of scope that the legal team currently provides is going to expand. So there's certain legal authorities or lack thereof that those 6 entities currently have, so they can pass things by resolution. Once we transition to the new district has ordinance authority, which has more regulatory authority for the local municipalities, and we will have to transfer all of those IGAs and current agreements that we have with the current district into the new district. So their scope of work will actually expand once we transition to the new district. When we talk about finance, I know finance is just one word, but it really encompasses quite a few scopes of work, including accounting, audits, the regulatory compliance that I spoke about, grant management. That's with all of our contributors, whether those are local, state, or federal, accounts receivable, accounts payable, all of our IGAs, all of our service contracts, district billings, development review, cash flow management, which can be taxing at times, payroll, budget, and procurement. So all of those roles are under this umbrella of finance. So when we talk about the constraints that our current revenue model places on the finance program, our systems specifically that we use to manage procurement, fixed assets, payroll, those systems are antiquated, for lack of a better word, and could use some modernization to provide that efficiency for that goal that we have to be more efficient in the future with the new district. So also in finance, we're lacking some office space. This is really finance and administration, so there are some administrative roles that finance also provides for the district. When it comes to the dissolution process, once we flip that switch to kick off the dissolution process, the scope of work will expand under finance during that time. And then once we go to the new district, it will also expand differently in a different direction. And I have 2 more slides later on in the presentation that talk about those 2 things specifically. But just wanted to draw your attention to that when it comes to finance, it's really the systems that need modernization and resources to staff those systems. So when we look at communications and government relations, I just want to give kudos to this team. This team has really made a lot of progress over the years. We can see from their work that they have increased transparency, public education, outreach, participation with coalitions, increased the revenue through collaboration and grants with our funding partners. And when we look to the future with this program, Communication and Government Relations, we really are looking at more of the same. So it won't be that their scope will expand, but they will need more funding to maintain the strategic communications, the website, graphic design, public opinion research as we move forward with our urban district programs. And I am sensitive to time here, and so I'm going to speed up just a little bit. And one more thing on this program, we currently maintain state and federal advocacy contracts, and like I said, going forward in the future, we will want to maintain those contracts once we transition to the new district. So the next 3 slides is really talking about a summary or an overview to kind of recategorize what the needs are, the current and future needs are of these programs. So when it comes to systems across all these programs, some of our systems needs include records management, the financial system modernization that I talked about, including payroll, timekeeping, and procurement, a very basic customer relationship management solution, and also specifically an IT strategic plan, and again, moving those servers out of the floodplain. So when it comes to programs, I just talked about systems for a little bit, but also for each of these programs, there are some needs when I say needs, I mean resources, staffing resources that Lori will talk about next, that are required to really fund the programs going forward because we're experiencing some constraints now and some lacking in our desire to deliver all the deliverables that we wish. I want to talk about facilities for a second. So when it comes to facilities, our administration building has a finite footprint. And also this is where our IT infrastructure, what little we do have is contained. This is in the floodplain and we are quickly outgrowing it. So when we look to the future and we look to providing the resources that we need for each of these programs, we're going to also have to talk about our facilities and funding, again, like I said, to improve those systems and some of the infrastructure, namely IT, get that out of the floodplain. So these are the 2 slides I was referring to. So when it comes to the transition itself, I know that's a finite amount of time. We have 1 year once we trigger that transition or the dissolution process, but that is going to include quite a bit of scope of work during that time, including transitioning all of our financials, all of our employees, benefits, assets, liabilities, easements, contracts, and grants. That work is really going to fall on the shoulders of finance and legal. And it's going to expand their scope of what it currently looks like. We're also going to have to identify and implement policies for the board adoption, and we're going to have to change our federal sponsor status with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and support implementation of our new mandates. This is one of the last slides here. Just wanted to highlight this, that once we do transition to the new district, there the scope of work of finance specifically will expand and be more than it is today, specifically regarding the compliance requirements associated with federal grants and bond funding. So I didn't want to treat this lightly. I just wanted to highlight this for the board, that we will have new scope of work related to federal auditing, asset management standards related to bond funding, grant writing, and management tracking and reporting. That can be quite a bit at times, monitoring, reporting our bond ratings, financial records management, and also meeting and reporting the prevailing wage and minority contracting standards. With that, I appreciate the extra time today, and I'm going to turn the time over to Sarah O'Brien for any clarifying questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. And I don't expect to do much facilitation here just at this bit, because I know you want to keep it to sort of quick informational questions before we dive into more detail. But Mary Helen has had her hand up for some time. So,
Okay, my question is, I'm confused and I'm thick as a brick and the only one that didn't get this, let me know. But in Steve's introduction, he said we were going to talk about funding capabilities. Everything we just heard is presumptuous of we'll get funding for this project, and we have not secured funding, and we've not discussed how that's going to happen. So I think, you know, these programs and proposals and sort of wish list of things that could happen need to come later, after we're able to discuss how the finance will be procured for this project. And so don't understand why we're spending time on that now, when we don't have the money to pay for anything right now. Exactly. So am I missing a point here somewhere of why we got a whole long list of things to fund, but we don't have funding, so we can't discuss it?
Can I take a crack at this as a fellow board member?
Go ahead, Nancy.
Sure.
And that's just, we actually as a board asked the staff to come forward with not only how much is everything going to cost in some sort of, you know, high, medium, low thing, but we also asked specifically for them to come forward with some programs so we could understand it. It's a bit iterative, but I think they're fulfilling what we asked for.
Mary Helen, I do think I'll have a slide in a few minutes that'll help here. So Steve, I don't know if you wanted to weigh in with any more than Nancy provided, but we look like you were going to say something similar. So
I understand we asked for that, but I was told we can't get into that discussion until we know if we have funding. So I'm just trying to clarify the different responses I've received.
Yeah, if you remember the little meat grinder slide that Ben showed at the beginning, we have to know what we're going to pay for, and we have to know how we're going to pay for it, and we have to know what the services that we need to provide are going to cost. And so it does feel iterative, and I know I can tell you that everybody's struggling with this in one form or another, just as you are, Mary Helen. But I hope it'll become clear as we continue today, because I think I will show you a slide in a minute that I think will help show that transition. Shirley, did you want to chime in as well? And then I'm going to ask us to get back to any informational questions for Ben if we can before we move on.
Yes, actually, my comment's probably very similar. As I see it, we're in the process of identifying the services this new agency is going to be offering. And those services then will then influence what the annual revenue needs to be. And once we know that what the annual revenue needs are, we will have information about how much we need to ask of the public to support this new agency. And that will then obviously then influence what kind of funding source we're going to be considering. So I mean, I see this is putting the details of this agency together and what it will do for the public, and today we're just focusing on support services, but I assume we'll get into the other side of the equation here soon. So I appreciate this. It's beginning to take shape. So thank you.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that what Ben described will make a lot more sense as we move through the next couple of presentations here. So Mr. Chair, do I have your okay to kind of step us into the next section here if we don't have other
Yeah,
other
please do.
questions immediately?
We're 10 minutes behind our schedule at this point. So yeah, I'd suggest we move ahead.
Well, I'm almost never skilled at getting people back on task. It's not one of my my strengths as a facilitator. I want to introduce myself real quick here, and then I'll share my screen. I have just a slide or two, and then Jim has, and then we'll dive into the next presentation, I believe. I think I've met most of you before, but just as a reminder, my name is Sarah O'Brien. I'm Executive Director of Willamette Partnership, and we're supporting the staff and the Echo Northwest consulting team that are helping with the revenue strategy. My job is to be kind of your process Sherpa as you work your way through a set of fairly complex interrelated decisions over the next couple of months here, and work our way through the swirlies that that Mary Helen just described, and that we all struggle with when a lot of complex decisions need to be made together across boundaries, and when they're interrelated. And have important consequences, then it takes a little effort to get there. Can folks see my slide now? I know there were some concerns earlier.
No, we're seeing your browser window.
Well, you saw me Googling Armand. That's not very helpful, is it? All right, I'm sorry. You know, I train people in virtual facilitation, and yet, give me just a second here. I apologize. Screen 2.
That's all right. We all do that. We try to figure out who somebody is.
Yeah, I have a lot of those open. Now can you see our lovely roadmap figure that we developed a while back?
Looks great.
Great, thank you. I think Steve already talked us through most of this, which was really helpful, Steve. Just a reminder that we've been working for a while now and from this roadmap figure, and we took a little pause. We've been working up through Ben's presentation just now through this kind of outline of programs, and we're kind of at that inflection point right now where, as Nancy described, you've asked the staff to help you understand what it is we're trying to pay for here, to understand as much as possible about current district's program work, the new mandate, how that's going to change over time. And that's a really important question, right? We don't want to necessarily start diving into how to pay for it until we know what we're trying to pay for. And then Lori will take us the next step today by helping us think through sort of an initial forecast or estimate of costs for the programs and services that we've described here. And this is a reminder that you have a long road ahead of you. And as Steve described, a lot of the sort of strategic decisions that everybody is often really eager to jump into because they're interesting and chewy and fun and compelling are a long ways off, and some of them are actually for the next board, which I recognize can be a source of frustration. But we have to start having some of those conversations about program substance and design in order to be able to understand how that works. So today we're bridging that. We're bridging that step from the program presentations that the staff have done. That was the fourth and final one that Ben just presented to give us a sense of, again, what we're trying to pay for. Hung in a minute will provide an initial presentation of a document that was in your board packet on sort of a first draft, a proposed set of guiding principles to support you in your decision making on the revenue strategy going forward. So it's always beneficial when we're a bunch of people trying to make complex decisions together to know what our shared values and criteria are that we're trying to make those decisions against. And so Hong will present a first draft of that she and staff have worked on. We don't intend to have a very substantive discussion on that today because we realize it'll take some time to think through and process. And we wanted to have a chance to have that presented and then have you go home and think about it. And then I think the next November meeting is the time when we plan on some substantive discussion around that. So bring those ideas back there. Lori will have a presentation of the preliminary 5-year financial forecast that you also saw in your board packet. And we're really going to focus the following discussion on what else do you need to know? What else do you need to discuss? Where do you want to dig in more? So we can certainly also have sort of informational Q&A around that, but we'll really want to hear from you in order to start preparing yourself for a decision on a proposed revenue strategy that's still quite a few months off potentially. What do you need to know, hear, or discuss to be able to make that work? And then we want to give you as much of a view of the landscape of the next couple of months here as we can. Again, at the next meeting, we can sort of chew through that guiding principles document, ask for some feedback on that, potentially propose any revisions, and hope to bring that back to the board for adoption again, so that can be a sort of anchor piece in your decision making going forward, and something we can refer back to and say, what's being proposed, does it meet these criteria? Yes, no, or maybe. We'll have continued refinement from the staff team of that financial forecast document. So if you do have feedback on that today or in the future, they'll be continuing to work on and sort of iteratively refine that. The Echo Northwest team has now all of the information that they need from staff on like this very rough first draft of estimated costs that they could be developing a revenue strategy around. I want to acknowledge that it may be frustrating that we're not able to share at this point some of the questions that you all have shared a lot of concern on in the past is specific impacts on customers, customer classes, individual customers. That's what the Echo Northwest team is working on now. They're digging in just as fast as they can because they know you need that information, and they have what they need from the staff assessment now to work on that, and they're hard at work. And then we're going to spend a couple months here working iteratively through what we think will be some kind of key interrelated issues that we expect to be the areas that you want to dig in on. We can add to this list if you tell us what you find concerning or really want to dig into more after this conversation today. Those are a few examples of what we think those will be. They're going to be problems that we don't solve today or in the next meeting, and they're all interrelated. So we unfortunately can't kind of usher you through this set of decisions that happen in a linear fashion. When you change one of the levers, the other levers change in this kind of situation. So all of these discussions will inform the eventual revenue strategy that the board will vote on, and the ordinance needed to implement that, which the board will have to approve. And so I've been describing this to the staff and the Echo team as almost like if you have those multi-party peace negotiations, we have to kind of build a core document together and then iteratively refine it over time based on your feedback, your advice, your sort of red flags, your concerns, your ideas. We can't just say, make a decision on service basis, make a decision on geographic apportionment, make a decision on affordability, and then we're done. We kind of have to link all those things together. And so we'll be continually asking you for feedback and listening to you in an attempt to craft this into a revenue strategy and eventually an ordinance that allows us to come up with something that you all can vote on and hopefully vote positively on. Before we dive in, the staff asked Jim to kind of remind us of the challenge and opportunity here. Again, to Mary Helen's question, before we start talking about what it costs, let's remind ourselves what we're trying to pay for here, and really to take us back to that vision that was created in earlier phases of this work. So Jim, can I hand the mic over to you here?
Thank you, Sarah. And I'm going to be mercifully brief. I want to just remind you why you hired me and why you all are here. As you recall, our system needs investment to maintain certification and accreditation that's beyond the capability of the existing legacy districts. We are unable to fully maintain and protect our existing assets. We have multiple layers of governance that reduce efficiency and increase costs. And we have board governance that's elected solely by landowners, not by all the residents that are served by our system. So our objective here is to get back into compliance with federal standards, to preserve our floodplain from being remapped by FEMA, and to have a more representative and more efficient governance structure. Next slide. So that's what we have to get done. And when we are successful, and based on the great work of the legislature and all the people who have come before us, and many of you getting us to this day, we will have a certified and accredited levee and drainage system. We're going to have a much more effective and better trained set of first responders with the equipment and practice and collaborative partnerships they need to keep you safe. We're going to actually have an asset management program, and we'll be able to keep up with the maintenance and repair and the upgrades that ensure that our system meets industry standards and is effective in keeping our community safe. We are going to embed equity and social justice into our work so that you will see more equitable outcomes. You'll have a more diverse staff. You'll see a more diverse set of vendors and contracts that we work on. And I think that will build additional community support for the ongoing investments we need to keep people safe. We're also going to be bringing our management style and capital improvements into the 21st century, where we will be partnering with all the national flood service agencies that are bringing green solutions and multi-benefit projects to the table where it's consistent with our flood safety mission. And we're also going to be able to do that in a way that helps us address the incredible threat that all of us face from the changing climate and these incredible rain events that are happening all around the world. And finally, we're going to have improved community relations and engagement that really build trust and reflect the history of the managed floodplain and the interests of the people that we are destined to serve. And so we are going to get some great things out of this. I know already that there are some of you who think our recommendation is way too low and some of you who think it's way too high. And I just want to remind you that our goal here was to show our work. You asked us to do that. These are preliminary numbers. They're our best effort to demonstrate to you what your professional staff believes we need to close the service gaps and provide a sustainable system that protects our community. And Hong now is going to go through some proposed guiding principles, and they go back all the way to the beginnings of this effort and the LRC. And staff has attempted to lean on the draft principles that you have before you as we've developed our recommendations for you. But I really want to stress to you, this is the point in time that I think most of us have been waiting for. It's also the point in time that it's going to be really challenging because there's going to be disagreements. Those disagreements are going to be founded in really heartfelt support for the success of this agency. And so I'm really excited to hear from you. And I know the entire staff is really ready to try and provide you with the information and responses that you need to make good decisions on behalf of the people that you're representing. It's going to take us several months, you guys, to get through this. So I ask you to keep an open mind, to remember that each one of you is coming to this work with a desire to help our community be successful and safe. And I really appreciate all of you for doing that. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Hong, and I appreciate Hong's patience and determination to really help us present you with an opportunity to provide the guiding principles that your staff needs to be successful. This is really your role as policymakers to provide us with the direction we need to bring you the numbers that you'll feel comfortable with. So with that, Hong, thank you. And I appreciate all of you and look forward to the discussion.
Yes, thank you very much, Jim. And it's again, as I always speak to staff, it's a very great honor and privilege to be in this position. I know a few years ago when I was outside counsel at Miller Nash, I remember given the task to search all of the ORS chapters. That was Reed Wagner's direction to me, and come up with a legislative solution. And so here we are a few years later, implementing what has been drafted with the leadership of Jeff Condit. And it's been such a great honor to sort of see how this is all coming to play. So with that, I just want to introduce myself, Hong Nguyen. I'm district counsel for MCDD. And today, as Jim was saying, I'll be presenting on guiding principles to help you in the next few months as you contemplate the revenue development project. In developing the revenue model, you'll need to make some funding decisions, some limited funding decisions. And we felt like we needed to address some of these principles early on because that's what staff used to generate the numbers that went into the forecast that Lori will be talking to you shortly. So if I may have the next screen, please. Just to lay out, again, the memo highlights this, but it is your job as this initial board to develop the revenue model. And there are many factors that go into the revenue development. They affect the funding decisions. And those funding decisions are governed by the statutory requirements of ORS 550, as well as some discretionary factors that you as a board get to make as a policy decisions. And as representative by the fact that there are many board members here, 17 of you all, with varying opinions, interests, and values, that we would try to develop something that keep the group at least in line with a target as it makes its decision on the revenue development. Next slide. The framework here, and I just want to highlight, we're doing some pretty novel stuff. Trying to potentially establish a fee for service to pay for flood safety work is very unique and rare. It's national precedent setting. And so we all should feel pretty honored and privileged to be a part of this. With that context of uniqueness, we are also a special district with a special purpose. And unlike the city and the county, we don't have general welfare. And so these are the guiding principles of what is it that this district does relative to its other partners, the cities that are within this managed floodplain and the municipalities. And so when we develop these principles for you today, we look to add the statutory mandates of ORS 550, as well as the mission, vision, value that you all had adopted, and the Levy Ready Columbia funding guidelines that were established some years ago. And really what came out for us was sort of identification for you, what the discretionary factors are in your policy decision, and determining the extent of the rational connection to flood safety and the benefits of the work that we do. That's the framework. Next slide. So from that, you all, some of you have had a chance to review it in detail. Thank you, Eric. I know you have. But from that, there were some key thoughts that you could take away from this in your consideration. You are to carry out, to establish enough revenue to carry out the statutory purposes, and there are two categories. One is flood safety that's carried on from the legacy districts, and the additional or new purposes that the new district is now need to add to that. That there should be a rational connection to the services we provide and the benefits that's received. And that's pretty critical, at least from my perspective as a lawyer, in terms of establishing a legal defensibility. And we want to make sure that we want to preserve as much judicial deference in the decision we make as much as possible, or that you make as much as possible, keeping it at high level, broad discretionary factors. And those are laid out for you in the details of each of the guidelines. The last point I want to make is really that the key, and this is to, the key is to develop a revenue model that can be implemented and administered, and that's going to require some creativity. We've never done this before where the district itself collects the fees, and so we've got to be able to find a way to be able to implement that system and move away from the property tax assessment and reliance on the county to have done all of the collection and billing for us in the past. So with that, I'm not going to go through the details of the principles. They are there, but keep in mind that these principles are what your staff used as we develop the numbers that Lori is going to talk about shortly here in the forecast. They're not set in stone. They are proposed for you for your consideration. You may adopt them later on as you go down the path of approving a revenue model with a set of proposed numbers for that revenue model. So with that, I'll open it up for questions. Otherwise, I know that Lori has an extensive presentation for you that I would like her to give as soon as possible.
Thanks, Hung. And just to remind folks, we'll have a pretty robust structured, we expect to have a pretty structured, robust discussion on this next time. But do folks have kind of framing informational questions that would help you think about this between now and the next meeting? Bob?
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Hung. I guess my question is, you seem to be focusing on flood safety as the core issue, and everything else has to have a rational nexus to that. I'm curious about that because the title of the new district is flood safety and water quality, and the enabling legislation put habitat, climate resilience, and other factors, equity, up alongside flood safety. It didn't put them subservient to it, put them alongside. And so I'm just trying to understand the hierarchy that you're coming up with and where that's coming from.
I can answer that for you generally, and I think beyond that, if you'd like, we can go into an executive session. I can give a really detailed legal analysis to protect our legal advisor, but it's basically, Bob, applying long-standing and statutory principles, actually statutory interpretation principles that are in the statute. So, for example, while water quality is in the title of the statute, oftentimes the title itself doesn't govern the statutory interpretation. What governs the statutory interpretation is the language itself. And so if we take, you're probably looking at water quality, landscape, wildlife, habitat. It referenced contribute to, and contribute to improve water quality. That in itself, the word contribute to is a limiting factor, and it is a part, not a whole. Couple that with the fact that in the watershed planning provision, it requires us to cooperate with all the other municipality. So it's not a primary thing that we do. It's a secondary thing that we do. But I can go into more details, certainly. I've done an analysis on this.
Bob,
I'm
is
very confident.
Is this something that you'd like to request of the staff, a more detailed discussion in a future meeting?
I would, because that was not the legislative intent.
Okay, I'm going to pause this because we are behind schedule, if that's okay, Hung. And Eric and Ken, if we can see to your questions in the next 5 minutes or so, I think we'll still have plenty of time for Lori's presentation and some discussion. Thanks, Bob, and thanks, Hong. Eric?
Hong, is your intent to include in Appendix 1, 2, and 3 as elements of our guiding principles, or this is just examples of prior work?
The latter, Eric.
Okay, so excellent. So I will, during our discussion next time, I'll be bringing forward some of those things from Levy Ready Columbia that I think need to be in the guiding principles. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. And I want to note Heather's comment as well in the comment, whatever you call it, chat, that she'd also be interested in a more detailed discussion on Bob's question. Ken?
Yeah, just good work on this. I think is the area we need to really be discussing before you actually even get into the budgeting piece, is because you gotta determine what your guiding principles are and how that's going to guide your budget process, etc. So that's important. One thing, a suggestion, and I could write this up and send it in to be brief, but I think there needs to be some assumption or mention of the level of service goals we're trying to get to, like risk goals. Are we protecting 100-year, 500-year, 1,000-year? We should indicate that in our principles, and I can send a written of my thoughts.
Thanks, Ken. And we've got another second on the more info. Nancy will add some specific questions. I have a quick heads up before we enter into Lori's presentation, and I just want to give folks a second. Looks like we don't have any other additional questions right now. Depending on how much time we have left after Lori's presentation, Lori, I don't want to ask you to rush. I know you'd planned, we won't ask you to rush. I know you'd planned on a pretty robust presentation here. We do plan to have, rather than the usual sort of popcorn style, a round robin discussion afterwards, where I'm intending to actually call on members and ask you to reflect on these discussion questions. And my parents were both teachers, and it always strikes me as a little bit unfair to give people a pop quiz without telling them, at least at the beginning of the presentation, that they're going to be asked questions at the end. And my parents gave a lot of pop quizzes, even around the dinner table, for the record. So I don't know if we'll have enough time to do a full round robin. I'll certainly ask members, and we can start our way around the loop and follow up next time if we need to. But the discussion questions that the staff are asking you to focus and reflect back on after Lori's presentation are just an initial impression, feedback. What additional clarifications or additional information do you need to be able to continue to weigh in on this topic as the forecast continues to evolve? And what would you most like to discuss more? So we'll have several meetings in which we kind of identify those needs more discussion type topics as we just have with Bob's question. And we're keeping a list on those and staff will bring those back and figure out how to sort of sort, combine and prioritize and sequence so those make sense. So I'll put these in the chat while Lori's talking, and these will be the questions that we'll come back and ask you one by one to weigh in on, in addition to just kind of Q&A and informational stuff at the end. So Lori, let me pull my screen down and hand the controls over to you.
Excellent, thank you. Can everyone see the slides? Look good? Okay, perfect. I am actually going to put my camera off because we are running into the Comcast afternoon instability of internet. So I want to make sure that you can hear me and see my slides. Okay, can you still see my slides?
Looks great.
Excellent. I will get started. Good afternoon. So in your package, you'll find a copy of the 5-year operating forecast for the urban district. Today, we'll be walking through the overview of the major concepts in the forecast for our projected year 5. This is just a portion of the information included in the forecast document. We won't be reviewing the entire forecast document today because of the large volume of data included in it, but we can do so in the future if board members would like that level of detail. This is our agenda for today's presentation. We'll be focusing on the year 5 of the forecast, and we'll review each component of the projections to help you become more familiar with our process and the data included. The operating forecast is intended to support your decisions around the revenue model for the urban district. The forecast provides details of estimated operating expenditures for the district, utilizing several segments of data, including the 22-23 adopted budgets for all districts, estimates for the impact of inflation, and estimates of service gaps, and the costs associated with the new responsibilities of the district. In November, you'll be provided with revenue and program scenarios for your consideration that show the potential impact on various landowners in the districts. We will have time at the end of my presentation for feedback and questions, and I'll do my best to move as quickly as possible so you get that opportunity. All right, so as we begin to consider revenue and program options, the expenditure forecast will provide the inputs necessary for Eco Northwest to calculate impacts of various scenarios. In order to have a clear view of the impacts, we're utilizing projections for the 5th year of operations of the new district. We've chosen year 5. As it's our belief that year 5 should provide a more stabilized view of ongoing operating needs for the district. Earlier years operations will include transition costs and costs associated with planning efforts, and it'll take some time to implement new processes. Additionally, major construction projects should be further along by year 5. You'll also see in future slides that under the current proposed fee revenue model, we project there will be some ramp up of revenue collections. This naturally creates some timing issues for addition of staff and services for the new district. As we review the forecast, please keep in mind the costs that are included in the forecast and those that are not. This is a forecast of costs funded by operating revenues, and as such, we've included estimates for costs to operate the district, some dollars set aside for contingency or emergency spending, payment of principal and interest on full faith and credit borrowings, and dollars for asset preservation. I will be walking through these costs in more detail in upcoming slides. There are certain spending items that are not included in this operating forecast. There's no projection included for major capital projects and spending funded by other sources of funding, such as grants or future general obligation bonds. There's also no projection of debt service costs for future general obligation bonds, as these costs would be funded via property tax from the property holders in the district. The exclusion of major capital costs does make some of the future investments look oddly low. You'll see this particularly in the area of environmental spending. Additionally, we're aware that the major capital investments are directly related to operating costs, and we've tried to take that relationship into consideration in our operating cost projections. The forecast itself is built using two major categories of cost: the ongoing responsibilities of the district, including drainage management, levee maintenance, emergency response, and support of regional partnerships, and the new responsibilities under new mandates for the district, which includes environmental work, equity and social justice, climate change, and cultural history. I wanted to take just a minute to acknowledge the level of support that's gone into the development of this first version of our 5-year forecast. Our urban district project team members have worked diligently to ensure that they've gathered all the information needed related to staffing support and other costs to support new district operations. Our board members have provided feedback on the type of information that they need in order to make informed decisions. We've held many meetings with our partners in local government and community organizations to understand their information needs and seek input on our projections. And finally, many of our staff, both in programs and on the finance team, have provided valuable input into the assumptions and numbers you see in the forecast document. We truly do appreciate the level of commitment and dedication that's gone into this forecast, and also understand that this is just the beginning of the process. In building this forecast, we pulled together information in 4 key areas. The 2022-23 adopted budgets for all districts form the basis of the projections. You'll see that there are projections for the impact of inflation on these dollars, and we'll review those inflation assumptions in a future slide. There are also existing service gaps, and we'll provide some estimates of the staffing support that will address those gaps. New services include personnel costs and materials and services that will support the urban district operations. And new responsibilities include the operating costs for equity, cultural history, environmental, and climate change related programs. The first piece of the forecast puzzle is the current operations. If you're following along in the forecast document, you can find this information on page 24. We're using the 2022-23 adopted budgets for each district as the basis for this part of the projection. You'll see each district's budget here, and to the right, before we add them all up, we're removing any expenditures that are inter-district costs. A good example of this is the staffing costs from MCDD that are charged to the other districts for maintenance and administration. So we don't want to count those twice. That's what the negative numbers are for. Page 25 through 28 of the forecast document provides further detail related to current operating budgets for fiscal year 22-23. Here you'll see our calculation for the impact of inflation out to year 5 of the new urban district. This information can also be found in the forecast document on page 22. Using the first year date of 2024-25 for the urban district, year 5 reflects the current budget impacted by 6 years of inflation. Materials and services inflation for 23-24 is estimated to continue to be at a higher level at 8%, and then we trend it down until we reach a more standardized estimate of 3% a year starting in 2026-27. Personnel services includes employee pay, payroll taxes, and benefits. Our historical average increase for these costs is 5.2%. For 23-24, we've increased the percentage to 7%, reflecting a known 1% increase in the PERS rate for the biennium beginning in 23-24, and anticipating impacts to costs related to the current higher levels of inflation we're facing today. For 24-25, we're assuming a 1% decline to 6%, driven by the PERS rate, which only changes every 2 years. For 25-26, we're using our historical inflation rate for personnel costs plus 1% for another anticipated biennial PERS rate increase. And for 26-27, we're using the historical inflation rate as this will be year 2 for the biennial PERS rate. We follow the same 6% and 5% assumptions in the final 2 years of the projection, again anticipating another biennial PERS rate increase. Included in your forecast, you'll find 3 additional costs. Asset preservation represents the cost to preserve current assets. This $2 million estimate is an average annual cost obtained from the most recent asset liability study that looks at our current assets, their estimated useful lives, and the cost to preserve or maintain those assets in good operating condition. These costs are normally covered by operating revenues, as they're not considered major projects that would have external sources of funding. Debt service of $2.3 million includes principal and interest payments on existing debt for all districts. This does not include estimates for debt service on general obligation bonds, as those costs would be covered by a property tax from district property holders. Last, we've included $1 million in contingency that could cover unanticipated or emergency costs. The next section of the forecast includes estimates for existing operational service gaps. We'll be reviewing projections to cover those gaps in the next 2 slides. Summary information related to service gaps is on page 31 of the forecast document. Current constraints in funding have impacted the extent of the district's ability to meet certain regulatory compliance requirements, achieve certain administrative performance levels, and to ensure the continued level of financial controls that we need. The lack of sufficient funding has also limited the ability for support staff to invest in and implement best practices in a number of key legacy district programs, information technology, software systems, and facilities. This chart provides a summary of the staffing intended to fill those gaps. Costs on the chart reflect the total of employee pay, payroll taxes, and benefits, including the PERS retirement plan, using current costs inflated to year 5. Detailed information about the positions is included on page 33 of the forecast document. This is our summary of materials and services costs needed to cover current service gaps. Detailed information on these costs can be found in the forecast document on page 33. In total, including inflation from current prices, these costs amount to $1.1 million in year 5. And we're using the same inflation assumptions that are on that page that shows the budget inflation for all of these other costs that I'm going to be presenting today. So we're using the same assumptions throughout the entire forecast. The next piece of our forecast puzzle is new services. These costs are for personnel and materials and services identified to support the new urban district operations. A summary of new services costs can be found on page 42 of the forecast document. Personnel includes pay, payroll taxes, and employee benefits, using current costs inflated to year 5. Details about these positions can be found on page 44 of the forecast document. This is a summary of the materials and services costs in new services. Detailed information on these costs can be found on page 44 of the forecast document. In total, including inflation from current prices, these costs amount to $4.5 million in year 5. Of that total, billing, customer service, and collections for the new fee revenue structure amount to $3.9 million in year 5. We will be discussing this cost further in an upcoming slide. New responsibilities include those new mandate areas for the urban district. You've received information about these program areas in previous board presentations. For these areas, we're providing a range of costs that can be considered with varying levels of program activity. A summary of these costs can be found on page 46 of the forecast document. For cultural history, the cost ranges are between $500,000 and $1 million in year 5. Included in the estimates are small grants, coordinating partnerships, grant administration, and evaluating and refining our programs. Details on these program options begin on page 47 of the forecast document. And sorry, my dog is trying to join in on the presentation. Hopefully that won't bother you too much. The equity proposal includes one FTE procurement specialist to support equity and procurement in both the medium and high ranges. This position would focus on outreach, education, and support for contracting with minority businesses, following guidelines and policies adopted by the Urban District Board. This equity, the equity manager position is included in current service gaps due to the need to fully implement the equity policy already adopted by district boards. Further detail on this cost is included on page 50 of the forecast document. For the environmental and climate change costs, projections include operating costs only. Capital costs related to these areas will have other potential sources of funding, such as grant dollars for general obligation bond funds. These costs were accumulated by staff in part through the evaluation work completed by Wolf Water Resources. Further detail regarding environmental operating costs is included on page 52 of the forecast document. And I'll just stop for a minute here and say, we do know these numbers look a little bit low, and that really is because a lot of the work that we did with Wolf Water Resources, what we recognized was the things they're identifying are capital costs, they're not operating costs. So that's the reason these look a little bit low. All right, so now that we've walked through each piece of the forecast, here's a summary of the path from the current combined operating budget of $13.9 million to the forecast for year 5 of the urban district of $31.5 million. In the green section, you can see the cost estimates related to current service levels. Beginning at the top, we have our combined operational budget of $13.9 million. Going to the right, we have 6 years of inflation on just the budget of $4.4 million. Asset preservation spending increases from $0.8 million in the combined budget to $2 million in the forecast, which is an increase of $1.2 million. We've added $1 million for contingency, and debt service principal and interest increases by $1.4 million by year 5. Estimated costs for service gaps are $2.9 million for a total of $24.8 million in costs at current service levels for year 5. In the blue section, you can see $1.5 million in new services, $3.9 million for billing, collection, and customer service of the new fee revenue, and $1.3 million at the medium funding level for the new responsibilities. Adding together the green and blue sections, you get the total of $31.5 million. It doesn't take much to get it to a much bigger number, is what we found when we started pulling all this information together. You can find further detail about the combined forecast on pages 10 through 19 of the forecast document. This slide is a summary of the low, medium, and high options of the forecast. For projection purposes, we're using the medium cost version for year 5. The primary reason there's not a significant difference between the versions is due to the nature of the costs. The more significant variances in cost occur in the capital spending, which is excluded from these projections. There's several assumptions in the forecast that can impact the total dollars in year 5. If inflation is changed by 1% each year over the 6 years, it's worth $700,000 in each of the personnel cost and the materials and services cost. So if you change that percentage inflation by 1% for each of the years, you could either pay $700,000 more or $700,000 less in each of those categories of cost. The average cost of a 1 FTE of pay, payroll taxes, and benefits is $0.2 million, so $200,000. The operating forecast is intended to support your decisions around the revenue program for the urban district. You can see more information about revenues in pages 4 through 8 of the forecast document. The expenditure estimates we've reviewed today for year 5 of the urban district will inform further analysis being performed to develop revenue projection scenarios that will be reviewed with you in November. Using year 5 expenditures at medium range, we can start to review revenue needs. Fee revenues, when collected independently, will likely have a ramp up of collection rates in years 1 through 5. Stated another way, under an independently collected fee structure, not everyone will pay their fees. Outside advisors have noted that year 1 collections will be lower, probably around 50 or 60%, with a better rate each year, rounding out to about 80%. So we've kind of highlighted that 80% as being kind of our goal collection rate. And if we're at that 80%, that is where we're saying that we would need revenue of $39.4 million to cover expenditures of $31.5 million. This means we need an additional $7.9 million in revenue just to collect enough dollars to cover the costs that we're projecting. As you consider revenue strategies, consideration should be given to the affordability of administering the revenue method, any logistical and practical challenges to implementation, and the extent of efficiencies gained after implementation. Given these goals, it's important to be aware that a few things have changed since the fee revenue structure was developed, with the primary change being that our local partners who initially agreed that our fees could be included on regular utility bills are now experiencing a change in customer climate, which has led them to step back from that offer. This has led us to look at billing the fee independently, which comes at a cost. On the right, you'll see that there are two components to that cost. First, the collectability costs that we discussed on the previous slide of $7.9 million. And second is the cost of independent billing, collection, and customer service of $3.9 million. We know we need to do more work to define that billing cost, but we also know that the district itself does not have the systems and security capacity necessary to perform those functions ourselves, particularly in the short term. As such, we're dependent upon outside service providers and systems. We're planning to do some additional work to better define this cost as we proceed. As you can see, the total cost, the price of collection of $11.8 million itself almost results in doubling our current operating budget of $13.9 million. If you add the budget, inflation, and the price of collection, you have revenue needs of $30.1 million, more than double our budget, without addressing compliance needs included in the service gaps, and without adding any dollars for new responsibilities. We know we need to take some steps to address this. In order to address the issues around the fee revenue structure, we clearly need to look at options. Although at the bottom of the list, another request to the cities to be included on existing billings or other existing vehicles of revenue collection should be considered, particularly given the availability of numbers to support the impact of their change in direction related to supporting inclusion of the fee on utility billing. So we want to be able to take this information to our partners and say, hey, this was unanticipated as we started looking at the fee revenues. It's really very costly for us to do this revenue billing on our own, both from a collectability standpoint and just the cost of the billing and customer service. Other options that we've discussed include development of IGA agreements with our local partners, partial or phased in dissolution of the districts, or other legislative options. There's more work to be done in this area as we move forward. And with that, I should be able to hand this back over.
Thanks, Lori. I'm watching the
welcome.
screen here. I see several of you are reminding me that when Mike Jordan was chair, he used to do this thing where he would like pull aggressively at his hair when we had a certain level of detail. Oops, kind of messed up my hair. So I'm seeing some of that, and I do have a list of folks that I want to come back to for a more robust discussion, but I see that there's some need probably for some follow-up and clarification questions before we do that. I'm going to call first on Mary Helen, who had a hand up partially through there, and then I'm going to bring us back to this revenue collection question that was in the chat, and then I will move on from there. So please do put your hand up virtually and get in line if you're interested in getting in that queue. Mary Helen?
It might be a quick one because I might have missed it. But when you made all these assumptions of what it would cost, I'm just going to go to grant manager or cultural resource. Where did those figures come from? Like I kind of remember it was like $250,000 or $500,000. And so who decided it would cost that much to do that task? Or how were those achieved?
Mary Helen, are you asking about staff costs or are you asking about materials and services? Because that's different depending on the area.
Well, it would be a new position. It's in the new.
Absolutely. So where I started.
Decided it would cost that much money to do whatever it needs to do to prepare that proposal.
So I started with our salary schedule. I took the midpoint of those salaries for that type of position. And then I used our regular percentage of employer taxes and benefits, including the money that we're paying for Oregon PERS. We're at about between 55 and 60% benefit rate on top of what people earn, which depending on which organization you're in is either high or low. I came from TriMet. We were over 100% on benefits load at TriMet. Here we're at about 60. So you add in that benefits load and then those inflation numbers, those percentages that are on that one page about how much is cost going to go up each year. Those inflation factors were factored into those labor costs to get to year 5. So you've got 6 years worth of inflation, you've got average pay, and you've got the benefits costs for each of those FTEs. So depending on the position, it's either, it can impact the pay level.
Then that's what informed the low, medium, and high figures?
That's what informed the personnel costs. So if we said that we were going to add an FTE, the low, medium, and high that are in those new areas, there's a lot of detail that's in that document as to what the assumptions were and what people looked at to determine what was included in those costs. And those were determined by staff in each of those specific areas. So they've got spreadsheets with long lists of things like here so in cultural history, for example, depending on whether it's high, medium, low, how many small grants are we going to give out? How many larger partnerships are we going to pay for? And so they did estimates depending upon the level of support that would be provided for high, medium, and low. And that information is included in the narrative in the forecast document. And I know, Mary Helen, that it's a huge document. I tend to lean towards providing as much information as possible. And I know not everybody will be able to dig through it all, but I'd rather have it all there in case somebody wants to refer to it.
I'm gonna keep us moving through our list of questions here. Mary Helen, I know that
identify with Tanny just went like this. And if Tanny's doing that, I'm in trouble.
Yeah, Lori had offered, I believe, Lori, correct me if I'm wrong, or Jim, to do a much more detailed briefing if a subset of members is interested in that.
Or all of you. Yeah,
or all
again,
of you if you are. So
this is the beginning.
Jim, do you mind if I go ahead and invite folks to put a note in the chat if they're interested in, what was it, Lori, an hour and a half worth of additional detail on this topic?
It will take a couple hours at least to get through 52 pages. The exec team, we were being a little bit more critical about the numbers, and we probably spent 12 hours together going through it all, but certainly happy to go through that and be able to help people dig through all of the data if they need that.
You guys need to feel comfortable with these numbers, and they're our best guess. And we're very subject to revision and direction from all of you. I want to stress that, okay? We're doing our best to get you thinking and to give you enough detail that you can weigh in thoughtfully about where you want to go with the future of the organization. No decisions are made. Your staff's done its best to provide you with some ranges based on our best thinking and our subject matter expertise, but ultimately you guys are the policymakers.
Okay, you guys are getting a very healthy quorum worth of interest in that additional conversation. So let's keep moving through clarification questions. Mr. Chair, perhaps we can see how far the next couple get us, and we may want to change our approach to discussion, but we've still got 30 minutes here, so we'll see. Ken, you're next in line.
Did you say Ken?
Yes, Ken Anderton.
Oh, perfect. Well, I'm a newbie here, so I may be asking some dumb questions, but first of all, Lori, this is great information. I think this as a forecast tool is a really great start. I'd just remind the board that, you know, is this useful in this format? Is this enough detail? And versus the numbers may change, obviously, as we get into more of these other things that we've been talking about, like the guiding principles and costs. So just as that, I wanted to add that. Also, I'm curious when the operating forecasts will be incorporated, because that seems like that adds a lot of cost to operating with debt service included. So when will that get incorporated to the forecast? And
I think you meant the capital.
Did you mean capital, Ken?
Or capital, I'm sorry. Yeah, the capital forecast. How does that get back to the operating forecast? Because if we issue debt to build things, you know, it's gonna impact the operating forecast.
If we issue full faith and credit debt to build things, it will impact the operating forecast. I believe at this point, we're talking about looking at a general obligation bond for some of those bigger projects that we're looking for the urban district. And so we have not taken into consideration any additional full faith and credit obligations at this point. So we're taking into consideration those obligations that are in existence for each of our districts and available at this point. And we are not making any assumptions about doing any further capital work with full faith and credit. We're only looking at general obligation bonds. So that doesn't impact our operating.
And we did incorporate some increases in our operating forecast and you'll see most of those are in out years. And those would flow from the completion of a watershed plan and board adoption of projects that would require, for example, arborists or vegetation that we don't currently do today. But those are pushed into the out years, and we tried to constrain them as much as we could to keep costs low.
Is there any matching dollars for grants or anything that need to go in the forecast?
No, most of those will be covered by the GO bond for the federal match that we need to provide. That's the intent.
I'm reminded sorry.
Unless the board wants to do something different, but our goal was to use the GO bond to provide that local match beyond the grants that we've received already, thanks to the public affairs team's great work with Business Oregon.
I'm reminded as I look back through the chat that I had promised to revisit this question that a number of folks raised about the previous collection assumptions. And Steve, I saw your brow furrowing there, and our colleague from Wood Village had also shared. So I think there's something, Jim, that you might want to help us clarify in the nature of whether that was an assumption on our partner's collection or a gentleman's agreement or something else. But it sounded like there was some concern that that was overstated a little bit.
All right, well, he's not here, so I'm going to blame Mike Jordan, the former chair.
I'm going to text him right now and tell.
The cultural history, as I understand it, and Colin, if you're here, you probably know, or Hong, or somebody, any of you who were here for the negotiations, I think when we were trying to move off the property tax at the request of many of you and many of the other stakeholders, we made an assumption that we'd be able to tag on to an existing billing system. My understanding coming from my Metro perspective at the time was that the Water Bureau seemed really ready to help us with that. We were hopeful that some of the rest of you would help, but the Water Bureau would get us 80% of the customers. So we felt like that was enough to go on, but there's been some changes in circumstances at the city of Portland that some of you may be aware of that have caused the Water Bureau to say, whoa, wait a minute, we've got a lot going on. It could be challenging for us to do that. And that's when we turned to the City of Portland Revenue Bureau, Northwest Natural Gas, and a private entity in Bend. All of them essentially gave us that same number of year one, about $3 million for customer service. And you could depend on a terminal collection rate in year one of about 60%, ramping up to 80%. They all independently landed on those ranges of costs and that rate of collection.
Jim, I remember this discussion occurring when we were going to the legislature to get the district formed. So, I mean, I think it was that far back.
That's correct.
Okay, Chair Fancher, I'm going to ask you, we've got about 30 minutes left here. I'm committed to getting us out on time, although like I said, that's not a strong point of mine. I think one option would be to continue with clarification questions. Another would be to ask folks to either pop those questions in the chat or hold them until their term comes in line. Do you have a preference here?
I do. I'd like everyone the chance to kind of say their piece. So I would love to give everyone a couple minutes, and everyone that has their hand up, that could be the order. I'd like to go first if I could as chair, and then everyone that has their hand up could be the order after that. And your question could be embed. And one of the questions you're asking is, what other information do we need? So you could include your question in your statement, but I would love to have everyone have a chance, because this is an important time. I think we've heard some great information. Is that okay?
That's okay with me. I'm going to ask the 4 folks who have their hands up to leave them up. I had developed a little random order generator thing. So Steve, while you're doing your comments, I'll resort those. And if folks who have their hands up want to put a quick clarification in the chat, I think it's highly likely that staff can respond to those in the chat and we can keep the conversation going. So I will alter and you
I'll
comment.
try to set the tone, and I'll try to get through everything I want to say and as briefly as I can.
Yeah, we will, folks, we will need to hold it to 2 to 3 minutes if we want to make it through the full group, and even that we're pushing it, so we may have to hold some for next time. So
obviously, some people on the board are going to look at the numbers that staff has put forth and say they're way too low. Some are going to say way too high. So you've quite predictably not made anybody happy. So you've done your job. So wonderful. That's great. There's no way that you're going to make everybody and you hit the perfect number. I think I'm putting my Gresham hat on right now. We have a lot of needs of our community members. Our council, I think, would think some of those needs are as great or greater than some of the needs included in this budget. So we're interested in keeping costs as low as possible. And I'm not saying that means that we disagree with where the numbers are here. I also want to say this analysis was excellent. I think we asked you to show your work. You showed your work. If you haven't had a chance to read through the entire document, as a board member, you need to read it. You absolutely need to read it, because to me, it was very clear. I saw exactly where the new costs were. I saw where the gaps in their existing services were that they were trying to fill. I'm not an expert on what these things should cost, so I need to lean on some of you on the board that have more experience on the legacy districts or the legacy boards for the drainage districts to know more about, well, is this number too inflated, or is this something that is reasonable? I need to lean on you for that. I think where we're going to get with some of this, just a little projection, is that, and maybe I'm going a little too far here, but as far as some of our mission outside of flood protection, if we're looking at water quality, I think putting a lot of those projects into the capital plan, I don't have a ton of concern with. I know Hong from a legal perspective may, but I think putting that out as a capital bond for the voters to vote on puts a lot of my concerns at ease that process isn't legal or can't happen. I'm more concerned with the operating, that if we create a fee and we're trying to charge somebody this fee for services that they're not directly receiving benefit, that's where I'm concerned that we're not going to pass legal muster. And it makes certain things like cultural history very difficult to figure out how to pay for. I don't think that's an element that we can generally put on a fee to people outside of the floodplain. That makes it very challenging to figure out how to do it. You can always use grants and donations to fund things. Maybe it's not a direct fee, and maybe the next board figures out a way to do this legally, but that's just a thought. And that's where I want to see more discussion, more information. Exactly which of these costs in the operating budget can be passed to property owners outside of the managed floodplain and pass legal muster. That's the key question in my mind, because I think if you cannot pass a lot of these $31 million of operating costs to outside of the flood district, you're going to have an affordability problem very quickly that is going to be a problem. And I just don't know exactly which of these costs we feel legally we can pass on. That's where I think we need to focus our work, and I'm gonna shut up there. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Steve. Well, well concisely expressed. I'm not going to ask staff to respond just because, or anyone else, because it'll slow us way down, but feel free to drop your responses to questions in the chat. I know that several of us are taking notes on items for future discussion. And Steve, I know some of those are very much issues that are at play and at work between the ECHO and the staff team as well. Nancy, and I have everybody, I put a list in, I put everybody in by last name here, and I don't think I lost or repeated anybody, but let me know if I got anything wrong. So if you can see the order, folks are welcome to pass and come back another time, or otherwise we'll just work our way down the list. So thank you. Nancy.
Okay, great presentation, but I'm going to focus on what I need to say, which is when I looked at that, like low high is like 30 to 32. I'm like, that's one number. That's not a low and a high. So I'm like, well, that's super easy with the amount of people that are paying into this. Like, so either we're going to have the old way, which we're in right now, where the small group of people in the managed floodplain is going to have to pay $150 million to fix the levee system and also fill all those gaps that have been identified. Or we have the much larger group of residents inside the UGB in Multnomah County pay for some of these new, help pay for it, but also the new, and I don't like to say additional, I think the new expanded mandates are pretty important. So what I'm thinking, one reason I put myself down for wanting to know more about it is, yeah, some of those new activities in the operating budget seem very low, which surprised me a little, but I do trust the staff to come up with things. As a board member, I just want to know if we're meeting our new mandates enough so that we don't get sued on that side. Because I do want this to go through. I definitely think the color of money is important because the legislation says do all this with a fee. I'm like, okay, well, I guess we're doing that. So I appreciate Steve bringing that up. Overall, I was surprised how low the new responsibilities are. And they're basically the same thing, like with our base of people paying, there's like almost no difference. So I would start at the high level and see what that gets us. That's what I'm interested in. Those are my impressions.
Thanks, Nancy. Anything else you'd like more information on? You came in under your 2 minutes. I want to encourage good behavior, but make sure that you have a chance to flag anything you'd like further discussion on. It sounds like exploring the top end of the range is key.
Yeah, and I'll put anything in the chat too.
Okay. Thanks. Bob.
I'll be very brief. I share some of the concerns that have already been stated, including Nancy's. I'm particularly concerned about how low the environment is. I understand that it doesn't include the capital, but I think a lot of the opportunity actually occurs in operations. And it seems remarkably low to me to really meet that mandate. In fact, it really kind of looks like business as usual, honestly. I think all the more so if we're going to draw a very narrow nexus, which is something, as I mentioned earlier, I think we have to discuss further. Those big capital projects become less viable. I think that's something I want to dig down on. I would like to be part of a deeper dig on the numbers here. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Bob. Can you clarify or perhaps staff got it just fine, but you were saying something undermines the ability to move forward with larger capital projects. Can you just repeat that?
Well, I think that as for my comments earlier, a lot of the projects I'm concerned that a lot of the stuff we've been talking about when we draw this very, very narrow nexus that we're talking about won't be viable. So
I see.
All more important that the operational side be green. So, but regardless, we're interested in both sides of the equation, and the numbers look small either way to me.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks.
Dave, and then we'll return to our list. I'm just going to give the next person a heads up. I had a Mr. Reeser who had his hand up earlier as well. Go ahead, Dave.
My comment is that related to the cost of collecting the fee. I've brought this up outside of meetings before, but I didn't hear it, this option brought up as having been studied. I just went and looked at my property tax statement from last year, and there's a fee of $70 for street lighting. On each piece, I have 3 pieces of property, it's $70 on each one for street lighting. I don't see why the county sends out a bill to most people anyway, and that seems like an efficient way to collect the fee, whatever it ends up being. It wouldn't be necessarily the same for each one. There's other fees that are on the property tax bill, but I just wondered if that got studied, or if it hasn't been studied, that ought to be looked into. These bills go out to most people anyway. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Dave. I saw Hong come on camera, and Hong, I wonder if you wanted to clarify anything there, or Jim, around what had been analyzed as part of that cost assessment.
Hong, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I just wanted, yes, Dave, yes, we are looking at all the different collection methods. The key is to try to avoid looking like a property tax assessment. And so my understanding is through the county, it's tied to land ownership. And so if you even charge a fee based on land ownership, it becomes a tax. So that's where our, and then the enforcement of the collection of that is a lien on the property, which is, again, starts looking like a tax.
Does that mean that a fee, a flat fee, if the property was subject to compression, would the fee actually be compressed? Just a flat fee like that? Do you know?
I don't know the answer to that particular question, David.
Well,
Friends,
we'd have to
We'll
look
look
at
into
the
it.
specific fee, and we did reach out to Jeff Condit, and he said it would probably require a constitutional amendment. We also reached out to Multnomah County and asked the assessor's office, and we were told, no, it's not a property tax. If you put it on our bill, it becomes a property tax. We do not have authority to issue a property tax. So the basis for your street lighting fee is the ownership of property, and it's a property tax, not a fee.
Okay, thank you.
So we've
thank you for the
definitely
question.
got, collections on our list of things that are going to require more, and the impact of collection costs is something. Dave, I just want to give you one more chance because you were quite concise and focused. If there's anything else you want to ask staff for more information or discussion on in this presentation and in future meetings.
Well, I can't think of anything else in that. My question was answered just now.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I really appreciate it.
You'll have a lot of time to ask questions over the next couple months, so that's fine. Mary Helen, was there something quick on the collection thing, and then I want to go to Mr. Reeser.
Okay, I'm sorry, just quick, because I know I've used up more than everybody else's time. I don't like the idea of saying we want to make it not look like a property tax. I understand all the functional, legal, all that stuff. But my concern is being upfront and frank with the people and know what they're paying for. I've been in a number of community meetings, and the very first thing out of people, what does this mean and what am I paying for? 2 former city commissioners says, what levy? Why are we going to pay for it? We don't live anywhere near it. So I just want to make that point needs to be very, very clear in everything that we ask for is the benefit to the cost.
So noted. Thank you. I lost Mr. Reeser. Are you here still? I don't know you. And so I'm having trouble calling on you when I can't find your name.
Hi. Yes, I'm still here.
There you are. Good. Go ahead.
Hi. Sorry, you'll have to forgive me. We don't have our official handoff between John and myself until next week, but John wanted me to sit in on this. I'll have 3 questions. They're just kind of broad. The first one, I didn't see anything on the principles driving the revenue model about equity. And I know that that is a huge reason why the underlying legislation did not enable property tax collection. There was a lot of concern about how that would disproportionately impact communities in East County that have less ability to pay and transfer a lot of the operating costs out here. And so I think that that needs to be something that, since that prohibited or kind of prevented an easier collection methodology, the concerns around that equity really needs to be a part of the revenue guiding principles. So I'd like to see that included. Secondly, with regards to the 5-year forecast, I didn't see any history of any prior history. And the reason why I brought that up is our mayor had mentioned that he thought that the district was, the old districts had about 20 full-time staff. And so I went back and looked, and it looks as if back in the, 5 years ago, the staffing for the districts was about 20 FTE, and the 5-year financial plan starts out with a base staff level of 41. So that's doubled the amount of staff in the last 5 years. And then the new services are being added on top of that. And so I'd like for a little bit of work bringing back what the operating maintenance costs used to be, so that then we can really define what were we currently doing, what are the service gaps, and what's new. Because going from 40 to 59 FTE is a lot different than going from below 20 to 59 FTE. And then the third suggestion I had is, I know that there's a lot of large organizations that are very rigorous in their budgeting, like Metro, the county, that have some staff that's really good at taking a look at what Chair Fancher brought up about what does this really cost and how does this compare to what other organizations have. And since we have some of the elected officials and high-level staff on here, if we do put together a small working group, I would encourage bringing in some of that expertise that's housed within those organizations to take a real critical look at making sure that when we have to take this back to our elected officials, that we can say this is absolutely what we need and there's no fluff in here. Because I heard that concern from a number of people, including our own council when the staff came and presented a few months ago. So that's the 3 comments that I had.
So thanks, Seth. That's really helpful. So digging back into previous staffing levels in a little bit more detail. And then there was another one that I lost track of, but I know that staff have the notes here. I'm going to call on Eric Mueller. We've got about 10 minutes left here, so I'm hoping we can fit in a couple more folks still. Eric?
From an impression standpoint, I'm pleased that we've gotten to this stage. This is the type of information I have been wanting us to put together for a while, helping us, create a framework. I guess part of what I would share as a perspective to the other board members is take a deep breath. This doesn't mean you're approving these as expenditures. They're going to happen next month. Even this framework isn't going to spend this money in 5 years. Every year there is going to be a budget process, and every year whomever is sitting in these seats is going to have to make those judgments. So yes, it's important to understand the framework and to understand the assumptions, but it doesn't mean that something that was put on a projection or an illustration doesn't mean that there's going to be $125,000 spent on that item 4 years from now. There's going to be lots of decision points before we get to that. I'm pleased that we've got the framework. If there needs to be some further refinement of some of the assumptions, that's great. To me, this is an important, part A. Part B was alluded to by a couple of folks, which is, okay, now that we have this, how are these costs allocated to the different payer groups? Because there's folks that are in the managed floodplain, there's folks that are in the drainage basin, and there are folks that are completely outside of the drainage basin, but still in the UGB. And I think that there's, based on the legislation, at least my understanding, there is the intent that there is different rates charged based on the benefits received. And I think, the next challenge is, how do you look at what's the right kind of cost allocation model once we've basically decided what the overall services and the overall costs might be. So that part I'm looking forward to discussing more in the future. So those would be my comments.
Thanks, Eric. Very helpful, and exactly what we thought we saw in the tea leaves in the next couple of conversations as well, and related to Steve's comments. I'm going to check in with John Neum. I know you guys are kind of mid handoff here, but to check in whether you have comments as well.
Yeah, I think for time, I think Seth, wrapped it up good for representing City of Wood Village and questions for the board and moving forward. So for time wise, I think go ahead and move on to other folks that want to have a voice.
Great, thanks. Feel free to share stuff in the chat as well. Shirley Craddock, and then next will be Tanny Stephenson.
At this moment, if you can believe it, I don't have any questions or comments. I appreciate the questions and comments that have been made, and it's been very helpful. So I have nothing to ask or add. So thank you.
Should we provide a great volume of information next time so that we can prompt more questions? I've seen that a couple of times, and I'm still learning every time I see it. It is a lot, and a lot of work went into it.
Yeah, I add another 30 pages. That'll be
there you go. Tanny.
Hey, good afternoon. First off, I think this is great. We've been waiting for this information for a long time, and it's really awesome that we get to see it finally. I know this is a little bit off, but how are our operational costs going to compare to like another drainage district?
Is there
what would
somebody
that
on?
look like if it was someplace else?
Is there somebody on staff that can quickly describe kind of how that enters into the analysis at least, or should we be prepared to come back with that next time, Lori or Jim?
And next time's fine. Another one is, if we're looking at 50-60% collection rate, what is that going to do to the people that are going to follow the rules and actually pay the bill? How much pressure is it going to put on them to cover the ones that we know aren't going to pay? And I think, I've heard a little bit already about the FTEs and where we're going, the delta that we're taking up is probably still going to have to go through the refinery a little bit and see how that's going to work out. And just, I think a little bit more, we're going to have to get into some more detail on the FTEs, the shortages, and really weigh in where those pieces are. Because I just think that at the end of the day, the cost to the landowner, especially in the floodplain, is going to be very, very high. That's all I got.
Okay, thanks, Tanny.
You bet.
Shirley, did you have a quick follow-up?
Thank you. This did come to mind. I appreciate Seth Reeser's suggestion regarding having some of the larger agencies review the challenges and costs of developing revenue streams. I know the Metro Supportive Housing Measure, which is a business income tax, it's just unbelievable how much it costs to be able to to get collect the revenue. So I assume that with Seth's suggestion, you're going to bring in experts on talking about what it takes to put these systems together. I'm thinking of the software and all the the technology, and of course the training and the staffing, and that contributes so significantly to the cost of collection. So I assume that's going to be part of the review that you will have based on Seth's request.
I think we can pull something together and have you guys review it, but I think it's a really good suggestion, Seth, and I appreciate you bringing it up. Councillor Craddock, I would love to get that kind of oversight and input from our colleagues. And I do serve on the executive committee of the National Association of Storm and Floodwater Management Agencies, so we could see what they can provide us in terms of sort of like to like. I will say that none of the other agencies in this nation are funded the way the legislation provides for. Most of them are parts of counties or other municipal agencies. So there are some independent drainage districts, they tend to be very rural and rurally focused, or they're part of a different agency and, you know, absorb some of those admin overhead costs and support services through broader property tax bases. But we can find some examples for you. And I think it's a good request. It's a legitimate ask. And I think we can find some information for you.
Thanks. I'm going to go to Ed Washington next. And Ed, while you're unmuting, I do have a note from the chair here that he'd really like to see if we can work through the last handful of folks. Some have had some comments already and we really want to see. So I recognize that some folks may need to take off directly at 5 and please feel free to excuse yourselves. But I think it'll be important for staff to continue to hear comments as far as we're able to make it in the list here, if that's okay. Ed?
Yeah, I don't really have any comments other than to say I appreciate very much what has been presented, and I right now I'm sort of overwhelmed a bit by the challenge that we're faced with, and so it's huge.
You guys got a lot of very detailed, difficult news today, and especially folks that are newer to the board and haven't received some of this level of detail on the challenges in front of us yet. We did recognize that this was a lot to handle, and recognizing the increases in costs and just what drives those is important information, but it can be overwhelming.
But I think that having said that, we are here. We're all here to come up with a solution, and regardless of how challenging it is, if we're here, we got to be part of coming up with a solution.
Yeah, I think they locked the door behind you guys. I don't think there's any getting off the ship at this point. So thanks for your comments and for your support to staff, Ed. Lori Stegman is next on my list, and then Ken Anderton.
Thank you, Sarah. I think overwhelmingly everyone is saying that we want more information. And I think it would be good having kind of a first pass at this. There's a lot of info here. And I personally would like to have the opportunity to now go back and actually read the report line by line after kind of hearing everybody else's concerns. And I think it'd be great if we could have another one of these meetings after. I'm kind of a visual learner. People, there's just a lot of data to assimilate. And so I would like kind of some homework time and to kind of like coalesce, okay, well, what everybody's saying, what's in the document. But overall, I mean, amazing job. And I know that there's a lot of uncertainty, but the reality is that, with all due respect, and I know that you've used modeling, but we're just throwing some numbers up on the wall. And so like, we don't know for sure, but this is really our best educated guess. We may be off here and there. And I think, sometimes you can't see over the other side of the mountain until you get a little farther up the mountain. So I do think that there'll be lots of opportunities for us to revise the numbers that you put out. One of the specific numbers would be what I thought was kind of low. Of course, again, we don't know how accurate this model is, but I thought I saw it was like $1 million for contingency. Was that right? And
it was
course,
$1 million.
Which seems really low. I mean, especially in light of the uncertainty. So that would just be kind of one of my suggestions, is to maybe, because we've never been here before. So I would, hope for the best, but plan for the worst. But yeah, I mean, really to staff, there's like, y'all just presented this in a nice, pretty package. And I know, there was probably, hours and hours and hours behind every one of those slides that is not reflected. So I just want to appreciate the staff's work. You all make it look easy, but I know that there's been many, many hours and a lot of work put in to present to us today. So I'd like to have another pass so that it could kind of like really sink in.
That's a really helpful request. Thank you. And I see a thumbs up from Jim. Ken. No, we got a little of your comments earlier. Did you have any additional follow-up items or things you want us to dig into in future meetings?
Yeah, I think the concept of benchmarking to other districts or other types of districts is helpful. You know, the thing I think we're going to be asked is how does this compare to services rendered by others? So having that data will be really helpful to us as a board to understand, are we getting the value that everyone else is getting? Is there any other best management practices out there that others are deploying that keeps their costs in order? I also think that's a huge number on collections. When Jim told me that a few weeks ago, that's a huge one to overcome, and there's got to be a better solution, honestly. One I brought up before was, you know, let's find a smaller special district that needs some revenue, and that they can make that as a business center and profit center. One came to mind was Port Hood River, because they're eliminating all their bridge tolling revenue with the replacement of their bridge, and so they're looking for a revenue source. But that seems like a ripe one to figure out given the costs. And then also, I'm still struggling to understand the overall costs in terms of, you know, capital projects, what those are. And maybe it's just I haven't dug more into this since I'm a newbie, but I'd like to understand that, how that relates to overall cost structure of both the landowners as well as the larger ratepayers.
Thanks, Ken. That's helpful. Timeline on the capital budget and implications. Heather King, I know you're fairly new to the board. Do you have, oh no, I'm sorry, Mary Helen. Mary Helen,
I think I can do mine in 30 seconds.
I'm going to time you.
Then, okay, do that. I think the number one thing is we have to let a landowner know what it's going to cost for whatever we decide to have happen. Because if they don't know, they aren't going to vote and we can't convince them. The other thing is, and I don't know at what point to ask this, but I have some familiarity with the contractor for IT services for MCDD, which is Phoenix Technologies. What can they not provide? Because they seem full service and they serve a number of jurisdictions in Washington and very large companies. And so they know your business. They've served you for, I don't know what number of years. They have technicians on staff. They develop software. They do all of those things. So at some point, I'd want to ask the question of why we would need to add somebody that doesn't have the experience in technology and support functions of 24-hour support. Why we would need additional staff. Doesn't need to be today, but put that on your list.
Okay, so customer impacts we know is on the list and a little more detail on IT gaps. Thanks, Mary Helen. And then I was trying to call on Heather. Heather, are you still there? Do you have requests or info or discussion needs for the future?
I do have questions. I've been sort of asking them to individual people in chat. A lot of it revolves around, Steve talked about that there is not an ability to charge for things that would involve cultural heritage and equity because they wouldn't pass legal muster. And that might be the legality of the issue, but I have a problem with like saying, okay, well, we'll just maybe get some grants or some donations to cover that part of the budget. I think that is shooting for the stars and a little bit scary when you're looking at a budget of this size. And I just want some more information on I think there was one position in there that talked about equity. And I only heard equity in terms of hiring staff and vendors. And I want to know where the equity is in the rest of this plan. And I was told there is an equity plan, so that was just passed. So I'd like to read that. And I know there's a lot of things I have to dig in on. Also the revenue collection of $11.8 million a year seems like a huge bogey compared to what our budget is per year. So those are my initial thoughts as a board newbie.
Great. We'll ask staff, right, Jim, to send that equity plan on and be available for a discussion. Jim, before we continue, Nancy had a question that I think everybody may be wondering about on timing of revenue framework decision in January and whether we're still aiming for our original deadline there.
It's up to you. You guys are the decision makers. We need to be quick, but we can't hurry. I want to remind you that our current goal, or my current goal, subject to your revision and direction, is to try and get our first dollar of new revenue in time for us to call for the election of the regular board and a referral of a bond for the May 24 election. So when you start working backwards from the adoption of a revenue ordinance, and Hong will have more to say about this later, the way there's various risk mitigation tracks we can take with that to minimize the risks of potential litigation. You start working backwards from needing that first dollar. We need you guys to be pretty close to adopting a revenue ordinance this winter or early spring for us to get the collection system up and running, address any of the challenges with that, get that first dollar in time to give people a chance to run for office, and in time for us to work with you to refer the bond measure to the voters for the May election and get the ballot title approved, go through the ballot title challenges and all those things. So
we're still trying, long story
we're still
short.
trying, and I want to remind you that the clock is ticking on our ability to fund this operation. We are drawing from a line of credit that runs out in 3 years. And so we need to move from the legacy district standpoint. We're generating about 8 million a year from assessments, and we do have service contracts and grants and debt, but we are tipping into reserves to keep the operation functional at this time. So we do need to move quickly, but we can't hurry because it needs to be done well and be successful. But
Thanks,
you guys are
Jim.
the deciders. You're the deciders on the schedule. That's the current goal.
Eric, Corky, and James are my last three, and then I'll send you guys off for your sundowner or whatever it is that you do when the sun goes down, if it's not too smoky. Eric?
Okay, so initial impressions, thank you very much for the detail. I've gone through it. I still have about 12 pages of questions for Lori. So we'll get together and go through that.
Send them on.
Initial impression is that we've got the investment in there, but not the return. So if we're building out a SCADA system, I don't see the return represented in the operating statement in terms of reduced maintenance expense. So I'd like to see more of that. What clarifications am I looking for? Measurable goals for each of those functional areas. And because it's really easy to say what the spending is, but we're gonna hold the staff and ourselves and the staff responsible for those goals. What would you like to discuss more? So I still need to get this long list of questions I have answered, and that means sitting down with Lori and saying, okay, I think I understand where you're coming from, but let's do this, and that way I can build something that's a little bit more straightforward to me, which would include an income statement, a balance sheet, and a cash flow analysis. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. That's a helpful list, and we will keep an eye out for your questions. Corky? You're muted. That's okay. I don't like to get through a meeting without having to remind somebody of muting. It's my only real job.
Been keeping my mouth shut for a long time, so I didn't know. Wanted to really make clear, Lori, great presentation. I really appreciate it, and Hong too. Fantastic information. I don't like the numbers very much, but I very much appreciate the information. Before the presentation, my question was going to be about kind of going back and getting maybe a 10-year history, leading up to our current budget to give a reference point, very much along the lines what Seth was asking.
Suggested, yeah.
The advantage of these numbers and the cost of collection being so high is that almost becomes moot. Likewise, the new responsibility numbers of 1.3 million, you kind of look at it and say, well, that's not a problem relative to the cost of collections. It keeps coming back to cost of collections. That is just too high. It's not acceptable. And I wonder if we have tied our hands with Econ Northwest, because we were giving them direction saying, look, property tax, because of compression, is not equitable. Well, a cost of collection this high is not equitable on those who are paying it either. So I think maybe we have to go back to Econ Northwest, and I know they're already moving on this. So I've got a real concern there. And I think we need to have a very candid discussion about that very quickly. Tanny touched on this also, suggesting that a 50% collection rate is not equitable. He's absolutely right. So that's my big point. I think we need to address this and address it as quickly as possible. It simply does not make sense to be spending $1 in order to collect $1.
So,
Thanks, Corky. And I see Eric's hand up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Corky, can I add into that? City of Portland for tree fines is now going to start liening properties. Would we be able to just put a lien on properties?
Jim, can we, Hong's shaking her head. I was going to ask if we could add that to the list of things to explore.
Well, I'll just say, putting a lien on the property is an enforcement. It looks a lot like a tax.
And there may be some
So
long-term.
HOAs are allowed to do that, and it's written into the statute. I just want you guys to think about that, because that's an $8 million delta that could easily go away if we got people to realize that we're providing a service to the total. It's sort of like national defense. And if somebody is freeloading by not paying, then like an HOA, you've got to pay your HOA fee.
Yeah.
Not saying, just want you to think about it.
Jim,
Yeah,
Jim,
Matt.
I saw you unmute, and I know that this is something that your staff is really, really worried about and working hard on too. And so I just want to reassure folks and give you a chance to respond as well, that it's not that the staff is suggesting this is a great idea. This is an analysis that you are working hard to find some solutions to avoid that outcome. And I imagine appreciate the input, but you've got a lot of work ahead of you still on this.
And I definitely want to defer to Hong on the legal process. I do believe we have authority to ultimately file a civil process with the county and get a lien put on a property. Again, I don't know what the fee is going to be. That's up to you guys, but in just some back of the envelope calculations and trying to keep that number low, I think we're likely to be in the $20 to $30 a year range. So the costs of collection through a civil process are quite high relative to the return. And that's one of the challenges. One of the other challenges we have is we can't turn our service off if people don't pay. And so that creates a disincentive for payment as well. So I think you're right on the money, Eric, and we need to pursue all these things. And we're actually having some strategy sessions with our lobbyists to see if there are legislative changes that would provide relief. I also think it's going to be important for us to reach back out to our municipal partners, indemnify them, put my name and phone number and photo next to the charge on their bill, and allow them to recover all of their costs. But I think that's an option that we're going to need to talk about. Sorry, Steve, sorry, Seth, sorry, all of you municipal governments.
No, we need to have the discussion.
Yeah, we got to have the discussion. We're also going to go back to the city of Portland and say, this is what it's going to cost if you don't help us. Are you sure you can't help us? And I had that breakfast this morning with Mike Jordan, who's now in a key position to support us at the city of Portland, and he's activated. So we're looking at a lot of different options, and we're going to need your help. And we really wanted to highlight this because candidly, the collection rate is inconsistent with the guiding principles.
Thanks, Jim. James, I want to you've been very patient, and you should go first alphabetically by last name. And so I'm putting you last, but please go ahead.
No, that was nice. For many years in school, I had to go first. So I just want to say for my initial impressions, a big thank you to Ben, Hong, and Lori. I was impressed with the detail and clarity. So thank you as always. The dollar figures associated with each of the gaps and the new programs seem reasonable and maybe even low, but I was pleased to see the dollar figures with each of the new programs for the high, medium, and low options. As far as clarifications or additional information, there's nothing I need now, but I do look forward to a next meeting. I think what I would like to discuss most is what's on everyone's mind, and I hate to belabor this, but I'm so stymied by the revenue collection costs, what it adds to the cost of the districts without adding any other value is just challenging. And I am not pointing to anyone or anything. It's just vexing compared to what we could do with that money could be put to greater use. One thing, and maybe the only thing that I want to communicate now, is that the proposal adds a number of new positions, somewhere between 12 and 20 new positions. I didn't see as many as I was anticipating for operations, engineering, and safety. In my day job, I work for a public agency with a large capital program, and I manage about $40 million of that program. And I see as our agency tries to balance many things over time, the programs at a high level have come to function a little bit like a Senate. And consequently, where we used to have a lot of money to do true asset planning and capital projects for asset replacement and asset rehabilitation, we're more challenged than we've ever been. And so that's on my mind. One solution to that, as far as this organization would goes, is that perhaps for all of the new programs, or maybe for every position in every program, we put those into what City Budget Office calls budget packages. And so there's a detailed standard template for the various costs, personnel and otherwise, materials and services, and outcome. Because when budgets are approved and then budgets are cut, it provides a nice paper trail in terms of the decisions made. I would like to see in that effort, and this may just be for the next board, I would like to see some firewall between infrastructure operations, maintenance and safety, as opposed to new programs. I'm supportive of the new programs, but the managed floodplain and loss of life and property are and the infrastructure behind that feels like my greatest responsibility and interest. So that's, I would like to see perhaps budget packages that articulate those different choices. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, James. Eric, shall we give you the last word and then I'll ask our chair to wrap us up here?
I just had thought of one other piece from listening to the various comments of folks. I think it would be helpful for us, even though I know very clearly that this was focused on the operational side and it was very much needed. I think it might be helpful if we could have a similar high level kind of recap of what the staff is thinking would go into the general obligation bond, so that we understand, how some of the stuff that's maybe been asked about that we may think we're going to take care of that on the capital side. Well, let's sort of maybe see what the big categories are of what that capital bond might include, so that we sort of have the rest of the picture. And I believe Ben has put together some of, he'd shown me some stuff earlier on the whiteboard. So I'm sure that there's a number of those pieces that are there. And I think that would help the board have a better kind of overall understanding. Thanks.
Thanks, Eric. We'll ask the staff to come back with info on when we'll be able to have that capital focused conversation. Steve, we heard a lot of useful and interesting feedback today.
I'm going to wrap
chaired.
us up. Let's thank Sarah to begin with. What a wonderful facilitation. I'm glad I didn't have to do it. And you were much better than I would have been. So thank you, first of all. And I'm going to go out on a short limb and say this was our most productive, best meeting ever. It's how I feel about it. We're getting into the meat of the matter here, and wonderful job on everybody's part expressing kind of where you're at right now, giving staff honest and open feedback. I feel like we're on a similar page, better than we've been since day one. So great meeting. Thank you. Officially, I'm going to close the meeting. We're done. Thanks for also sticking around 21 minutes later than 5 o'clock. I think it was important for us to give everyone their voice and get it done in one meeting. So we'll continue this discussion, and I'm hopeful right now, very hopeful.
Thanks to all of you for your time and help. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you guys so much. Great discussion.
More to come. Look forward to your direction as we keep working on it. Appreciate all of you.